Hey guys, it's
Uh-oh.
Pastor Brian and Pastor Brian Lloyd, and we are continuing the conversation from the message on divisiveness and going a little deeper on the issues that our country is facing and then the questions that you have. We had a text number for you to text in the questions during the message and during the panel, and we want to address and continue that conversation addressing those questions. So today I have Leland Green is back with us, and Leland is there at his house in the most quiet room of the house he can find. And so thank you for joining us. And we also, Evelyn
Indeed.
Johnson is joining us today. Many of you will know Evelyn from seeing her beautiful face singing on our stage, and we're excited to have her as often as we can. And she is actually, I think you're in Georgia, is that right?
That is correct. I'm in at Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia.
So thank you for joining us and carving out a little bit of time and joining us today to talk a little bit more. Pastor Brian, we want to continue that conversation, and so talk to us a little bit about what kinds of questions and feedback we had, and let's see what we need to do to respond.
Yeah, thanks again for doing this, Pastor Brian, and for Leland and for Evelyn for joining us. And, I really love people's vulnerability in these questions, and you can just feel that they're really, wanting to know more so they can, know how to be helpful and how to respond and to be so I appreciate that, everyone who has set those questions in. I'm going to go ahead and jump into one, if that's all right. And this was from a female in our church. And she said, as a Christian and a white female, how can I show my support specifically to the Black community right now that will not be viewed as diminishing the real hurt and fear that the Black community is feeling?
Okay, Evelyn or Leland, which one do you want to try to pick up on that first?
Evelyn, you want to jump in?
Well, sure. I don't have a problem with jumping in on that. Well, the best thing that we can do is continue to pray. I mean, prayer covers a multitude of sins, so the word says, and it covers so many areas that we can't reach or we cannot get to. Prayer can definitely take care of that. I'd say continue to love the people that you're already loving. Don't allow the aggression, don't allow the stress, don't allow the feelings of others that are around you pull you in to feel like you have to do something, right now. No, right now I got to do something. But prayer, definitely loving the people that you're already loving, being there for that. If there's something going on, I always think about not necessarily just the people who are in the streets that are doing things, but the family of people that are going through what they're going through and those different things. Maybe there's an organization out there helping them in some kind of way and legally to do things or something like that. That's all an opportunity to help in some way. And if you continue to love people, you've done a great job right there. That and prayer really covers a whole lot, believe it or not.
I'm so glad that you brought up prayer as the first thing, because as a pastor, I so often see many Christians misunderstand prayer. They think prayer is somehow getting God to do something that maybe he didn't really want to do. Please God do this and please God do that. And biblically, prayer is the process God uses to align my heart to his heart. And the fact is how God feels about all of this. It's breaking his heart. He hates divisiveness. He hates what it's doing to us. And so prayer is a great place to start. Leland, what would you add to that?
I agree. I think prayer is a huge piece to solving this big problem that we have. I would also say talk to I think the in order to solve the problem, it needs to start in the church. And I think a church like ours, I think that's why it's so great that we go to a church like ours, because we are trying to address the issue. We are not a primarily Black church. We're a majority white church, but we're tackling the issues that impact the body. So I would say, if maybe challenge your, some of your friends, who go to different churches, your white friends that go to different churches, and see what the conversation is going on at their churches. If they're not talking about, the things that impact the body, then ask them to challenge their pastor to talk about things that really are impacting the world. Because how do we reach people if we don't know, why they're hurting? So
that's a great response. And one of the things and Evelyn just joined us in teaching at our Dream Conference, and one of the important principles that we teach other churches constantly, and hopefully we try to practice, is that one of the ways that the church stays relevant is that you need to know what everyone around the church is talking about, and then get in on the conversation, because God does have thoughts and views. These are not political issues, and I think that's my greatest frustration in America today is the politicization of these issues. These are not political issues. These are deeply moral and spiritual issues. The Bible has a voice to speak on that, and so should believers. So let's try to keep hitting more questions. Brian Lloyd,
Yeah.
or if you have something to add to that, or any other.
I think you guys covered it. So I'll jump right to a next question again, and love the honesty of this question. Of course, recent events have brought these issues to surface, talking about what's happened with George Floyd and some of the others of recently. But what does this look like? And this is really geared to you guys. What does this look like day to day? Is this always an issue? And they're talking about racism and being mistreated. I feel like I'm a bit naive because I don't see it locally or among my diverse group of friends and family here where I live. So I think the question is help us understand, I don't sense this, but is this a real thing, every day? And is what they're asking. Is this always an issue? I think is what she's asking.
And if I may, can I even spin the question a little bit? Probably outside the intention of the author, but I know in closed circles, a lot of white people, will say to other white people, I just don't see this as a big issue. What's the deal? And that's kind of, and it's partly because of our subcultures that we live and do life in, and so maybe this is not something we see a lot. So Leland, how would you respond to that?
I think it's racism and bigotry. It's something that's ingrained in the fabric of our country and our culture. I think us not being able to see it, I think, is really just because it's like one of those things where it's been ignored so long that if we broke our, if we did something, and we damaged our leg and we started limping, eventually you just kind of start moving with the limp, and you learn to adapt and move with the limp. And I think that's the hard, ugly truth about the history of racism. I think we've as a culture and as a country, we've learned to adapt to walking with this limp. It's more than a limp. I hate to kind of minimizing it using that analogy, but it's happening. I think the more people of color that you interact with, you'll see that their experiences vary greatly. Some may have not experienced it, may have not experienced it, here on the shore, but I guarantee you talk to enough people, you'll find out that somebody's experiencing it, and we experience it to very different degrees.
I certainly don't want to minimize that at all, but it's sort of like the syndrome of, when you buy a brand new car and all of a sudden everybody's driving that car. You're suddenly aware, because I think our mind isn't normally tuned in to some of the signals that are very clear, maybe all around us, but we're not tuned in until all of a sudden we're looking for it, and then we're like, wow, there's a lot more than I thought was going on. So, Evelyn, what are your thoughts there?
I agree with Leland, and I will also say, when he asked, I kind of look at things a little different, because he says, is there a way where, you see it and then it's happening? But then my first thought was, well, are we people? Is it humans walking around? Then yeah, it's gonna happen. You know, that's kind of basic the way it is because there's sin. So therefore, looking at it as a sin issue, any human, any person can deal with racism. It doesn't have anything to do with whether you're black, white, purple, blue, brown, or anything else. It has something to do with your heart and the way that you look and view human life and any life. So therefore, when you say, you know, do you have to deal with it? Well, we're breathing. So we have to deal with it, be it from, you know, a color tone to being a woman, to being a man, to being a child or whatever, you're going to have to deal with it. So therefore, you know, it's never where you could say that, do you have to deal with it? Everyone does. Everyone does. Now, is it more relevant when you look at the racism in a black perspective to a white perspective? Then of course, therefore, you will see that what happens with the
You're all right.
You're good.
perspective. I'm sorry. My daughter was getting out of the car. When you look at that, then you see that there is an issue that you have to face and see on the Eastern Shore in any area. You're going to find people who have issues with other people, regardless of what you might be or how perfect you might think you are. Someone can find any issue with you if they so choose to.
Sure. Now, I think clearly there are some hotbeds, and you know, having grown up in a very, very large city in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and then now moving to the Eastern Shore, I would have to say that there are hotbeds of places where you're going to experience more of that, and there are places where you experience less of that. So it tends to be somewhat, not completely, but there are also some geographical issues, and in a lot of the big cities, it seems like that swelters up to a pace that we see it more visibly, and I think that's playing out in America right now. We're seeing a lot of the large cities where that's really kind of coming up. Any thoughts, Pastor Brian?
You know, one of the things I thought about when that question, this even kind of ties back to what can we do as white people to help. You know, some of it's just so subtle that I don't think that us white folk realize it. Even times I've even been at a restaurant, and maybe you two have even experienced this, where it's me and a black person next to me, and I've seen the white person look to me first, even though we were there at the same time, you know. And I think, or even they've been there before me, and I think, you know, those are the things that, you know, I don't think sometimes we think about that so much, but where you got to step back and say, oh no, they were here before us, so, you know, go ahead and wait on them. But it's so indoctrinated, and like Leland said, that I think, you know, there's just these little subtle things. Yeah, you may not, I think as a white person, if we keep our eyes wide open, yeah, you may not see some of the stuff you're seeing happen now all the time, but there's little things like that where just there's preferential treatment toward a person of, you know, that's not, you know, a skin color than people that are of color, you know. And that's not just black, but Hispanic, you know, and as well. And so I think, you know, I think it happens a lot more than what we realize. It's just sometimes we're not eyes wide open and you know, to it. So
and just to comment on what you said, Brian, I think that's a great point. It's so subtle that a lot of times, you know, you don't even know that it's happening. I know I can speak for myself. You know, you kind of see things like that, and you're like, man, you know, what was that about? You know, and your heart, you don't want to believe that that's what, you know, that's what it was, or that's what that person's intention was. But with racism, if it's not something that's overt, like what we saw, and the things that we're seeing, a lot of times it can easily be overlooked by people. So it is very subtle. It is very subtle, but you know, I can speak, you know, from a psychological perspective. It weighs on you. I mean, for me, I'm always, you know, leery of things that you know, look suspicious. You know, when things are happening, I'm like, man, I wonder if that happened because, you know, of my skin color. I wonder if that ruled me out of that opportunity.
So let me push into that a little bit, because I think in the psychology of it, there are many whites that would say, look, maybe you're reading a lot of racism in the stuff that's just not there, because can you actually start getting paranoid and believing that that's the, you know, that racism is the root of all evil? Like that's everything that's happening. And that's, I think that would probably be a counter perspective from a lot of white folks that feel like, man, maybe there's not validity there because, man, I'm not racist. And so they start feeling like, are you seeing racism everywhere? And is that you? That's going to be, you know, how would you respond to that?
Wow. Well, I mean, I would say no. You're not being paranoid. It's happening. I mean, that's the reality. But I got thinking when Leland was speaking, and I got thinking about, it's kind of like you talk about the car situation. If it's never in front of you or you never bought that car, then you never noticed it. We notice it more because we have bought that car. That makes sense. So that car's been bought. And, you know, unfortunately, that car was bought way before we even knew that it was going to be bought. But we had that car. And the thing of it is, we have to drive that car every day. So we see that on a regular basis. And those who don't have that car just see it every now and then and never really notice it until they encounter a situation with someone that has that car, and then now they're noticing that car every single time. So once you've been with a person that has experienced that kind of attitude towards them, then you become more aware every single time it happens, and you go, they just did that, you know, and now you become more aware and you can notice those little subtle things that Leland was talking to. Oh, it happens, and it happened to the best of us. But the thing of it is what do you do after it happens? Right. You know, your attitude after it happens, your perspective after it happens, what are you going to do or take from it? And then are you going to let God shine, or are you going to let your feelings and attitude shine instead? So it just makes a difference. But it's definitely there for sure.
That's such a great feedback. I think that's helpful because you know, you're saying, in a sense, walk a mile in my shoes. And yes. The reality is, for most white people, the reason that they cannot really, you know, and even what you started with, Pastor Brian, and talking about the question, like, I'm not seeing this. Well, some of it is because I'm not driving that. So that's part of the reason. That's great. Leland, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, kind of like Evelyn, I think what, you know, the getting into the psychological perspective of it, I mean, racism, you know, and that feeling of it is so damaging. I think it has the lasting impact of, you know, almost a sense of paranoia, because you don't want to experience that hurt anymore. You know, it's kind of like, you know, someone experiencing, you know, a really traumatic situation. Of course, you're going to try to cover up that wound and try to prevent yourself from having it, and try to keep your eyes wide open and focused, because it was so traumatic the first time and the second time, and maybe even the third time when you experienced it, that you're always going to have that sense of paranoia. And maybe you're wrong, but you certainly don't want to be right about it again.
Yeah. That's good.
I think you would be impossible to be a little on guard. You know, Heather and I, my wife loves New York City. I tolerate New York City in part because she loves going, but part of it's the same. I have a view of New York City because when I was heavily involved in the drug trade, I went to New York City. So I saw a side of New York City. So I know about some things. So when I go there, I'm looking through that lens at times. Even now, it's been 25 years since that happened. But, you know, I would imagine it would still be the same. Once you have the first instance, you're just going to always look at scenarios, I think, through those lens. Hey, let me ask another question. And from you, Leland and Evelyn's perspective, hey, can you guys please talk about white privilege and what that means? They said, I don't know if I completely understand what that means. And which might mean we're privileged, but you know, what is that word? I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. Well, to some extent, you might be privileged to be far enough away from it that you really don't understand from the viewpoint of of a black man and a black woman what that really means. So for those of us that are removed probably enough, because I think that's what this person is saying for sure, obviously. What do you think white privilege is? What does that mean? Because that's a word being used a lot right now. Evelyn, can you share with that?
Mhm. Well, white privilege, took a class one time in college, and it was something that we had to talk about with that and assimilation and all these other things that, I think about every time I hear white privilege. And it was during a time where they were doing the affirmation, where they were trying to make a change for Black people to have some of the opportunities that whites have, and so on and so forth. And so, a big argument about this white privilege and what that means. When I think of white privilege, not something I use, because to me, I mean, life has happened. We've experienced what we've experienced. Things have occurred and happened that we wish we could change and do something different with, even at this point in time now. However, those things that happened in the past is difficult to change, because it is the past. That's what it means. It's happened, it's occurred, it's there. So the white privilege, when I think of it, it means that white people have certain opportunities and have been afforded some things that Black people have not. And therefore, you have the privilege, you have the right to just walk down the street with 4 or 5 people and not be looked at as you've got a gang and some trouble is getting ready to start. You have that privilege. You can do that. You can be loud in a restaurant or raise your voice and not be looked at as if you're being aggressive towards a person, because you've raised your voice. That's the privilege that you do have, without any repercussions coming back to you. You can, maybe say some things to a police officer in a way and not be taken derogatorily to you, and assume that, that means that you're ready to do something, or you need to be contained or something, or put in a control, in some kind of way. You have that privilege. You can do that. You can go into a job and, expect that someone's going to look at you for your skills, your ability, and not because of the color of your skin. So Andrea touched about this a little bit, where she teaches her kids, you have to be 10 times better. So I go in for a job, I have to make sure that I'm the best of the best. If I'm expecting to get that job, even though others probably already, coming in can do that. So, but that white privilege, you don't have to see that. You don't have to do that. Our forefathers worked and did some things and had was very knowledgeable in a whole lot of areas and didn't get credit for a whole lot of things in which they did. Know that their families reaped the financial benefit of what they did. However, for the other side, their families did do some things, and even if they didn't, they did claim it, and then therefore your family continues to grow and have financial, sustainability from what was done then. There's a whole lot of things, and you can go back in history and we could go on about it. But when I look at white privilege, that's the only thing I look at, is the opportunities that you have, because of the color of your skin, in comparison to where I am as a Black person, that I have to make difference. So I'm not fighting the battle of the Black, I'm fighting the battle of the Black and a woman. So you can look at that as well. So when you talk about racism or, prejudice and all this, it's not just a Black white thing, but an overall thing. So that's kind of what I see. Leland can go from there.
Well, and you hit on a lot of it, Evelyn. I think, Andrea, one of the things that I wanted to comment on Sunday, but I just kind of, jumped in with my thought too late, was when she talked about her sons. She would tell them, hey, you can't walk in a group of 6 or 8 people, and because you look suspicious, which is, unfortunately, it's true. I mean, I my wife and I, we kind of talked about that a little bit, and I said, I know I'm not going to put myself in a situation, where I'm going to have 6 or 8 of my Black friends, and we're walking through some area just to be judged because it's going to look suspicious to someone. If it's a situation where it's a family reunion, that's completely different. But 6 or 8 black guys, to a lot of people, it looks like they might be up to no good. Whereas 6 to 8 white guys in a situation, no one would think much of it. And to me, it's like, it's a privilege to be able to do something like that. It's a privilege to not have to worry about how you're perceived and regular just social contextual situations. Those are the types of privileges that I think Black people most often we wish and we hope and we dream we could have.
So as a pastor and as a wordsmith, I mentioned on Sunday, my framework is always going to be from a biblical perspective. And then the biblical perspective is always going to be moving towards reconciliation. That's why I chose Ephesians 2. And I take exception to the phrase white privilege, and I'll just tell you why. I think that the word itself pushes us further apart, because I don't know any white person that's going to respond positively to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know every issue you said is valid.
Yeah.
So for me, I would push stronger to say, let's talk about racial inequity. And I wish we could talk more about racial inequity than white privilege, because it just puts white people in a posture of defense and animosity. And potentially, and I'm not saying this is the case, but potentially, I know human nature because I work with sinful people doing sinful things all the time. And what I do know is that white or Black, we're always looking for a way to excuse our inappropriate behavior. And I worry about using white privilege as an excuse to say, well, I just can't get ahead in this world because everything's against me. And so I'm going to check out. And I don't want anybody to check out. I want everyone to fulfill the American dream. And so I don't particularly like that phraseology. On Sunday, I did this again, and I know I caught a lot of flack the first time I ever mentioned that I don't like the phrase Black Lives Matter. And that's a theological stance. It's not a political stance. And I know I caught a lot of flack the first time. I'm sure some people really hated that this time. So I just, again, how do you feel when when this white guy says, I prefer all lives matter? I'm coming from a theological, but what does that do? How does that make you feel? What would be a response to that? Leland, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, if I could co-opt the phrase Black Lives Matter, what I really think it implies is Black Lives Matter too. When you look at some of the things that are happening in our world, in our country, you wonder if Black lives actually matter, because I think implicit in Black Lives Matter too is the assumption that all lives actually matter, except for Black lives. So the emphasis on Black Lives Matter is really the two part of it, which is silent. It's Black Lives Matter too, because I think we can still acknowledge that all lives matter without disparaging the fact that Black lives don't really matter as much. I think when people are really pushing for that, it's really the silence of our voices in this country, the indifference that people have, the apathy to our voices that makes us have to scream something like Black Lives Matter. And again, it's not to disparage that all lives matter, but it really is to bring to the forefront that Black lives matter too.
Yeah, that's great. That is a great statement. I kind of expected you to say that because I really believe, I know from everything I've read, that's the intent behind it. But I also know that in this what I would almost call a culture war in our country of divisiveness. That, man, we, the mantras matter, and when we just say white privilege without defining racial inequity, it's a battle cry. If we say Black Lives Matter without defining, hey, my life matters, and it doesn't seem to have been given the right amount of focus, that's an important message. And what you just said is absolutely spot on. So I know I just want to make sure that folks that are listening, that these words and how we come about these conversations, man, could not be more critical. That what we need to do is to slow down and listen. We need to listen. Evan, what, you have thoughts on that?
I agree with you, and it's so funny because when he said white privilege, I had to go all the way back to my college years when I heard that for the last time. It's been a while since I've heard that, and it came along with like I said, when affirmation came out, and that's been some time too when you first talk about that. So, and the Black Lives Matter, of course, what Leland said, that is true. But it's so funny because when Black Lives Matter came and I was teaching and I was talking to my students, of course, I have some students that are there that are Black, are coming up with reasons to act out and do things. My first thought was to tell them exactly the same thing. All lives matter. Does Black Lives Matter? Most definitely, all lives matter. And then we had to get in a conversation, one that's kind of hard, but at the same time true. And I know a lot of people don't want to say it, and it's, I got to have that conversation with them, and because they like to have discussions like that with me. But the one thing that I thought about mostly is, look how many Black people take Black people's lives, and how many things, not to diminish the fact that the people who are doing what they did should be okay because other Black people killing other Black people. I'm just saying lives, period, should matter. And it doesn't matter which color the person is that's taking the life. Yeah. It all matters. And that's what was critical for me in that situation. So I'm a little different on that because I always go back, to the word, and I always look at it biblically and say, sin is sin. And it doesn't matter what color it is, and God doesn't care what color you are when you're sinning. It's still sin, and it doesn't matter which way you look at it, and which direction it's coming from. It's still sin, and it's wrong. It doesn't matter from the direction in which it comes. So I agree, because when we had that discussion about affirmation, we had the discussion about white privilege, it brought about an argument, and then there was division in the class for that very reason, and that's what first came back to my mind, that there was an argument that occurred in class and people were feeling a certain way. But if we stop and listen to both sides and listen to all the sides and take the perspective of the other people that are speaking, no one's saying that what you're saying is invalid or what you're feeling is invalid, but they're just saying, this is also my perspective. Can you take time and look at this perspective? And I haven't experienced that. And listening is the best thing. That's the key. And if we listen in love, then when we listen in love, not in judgment, not in pointing, not in division, if we listen in love, we get a whole lot further than where we are right now. And we probably wouldn't be having this conversation.
Preach from Atlanta,
hey,
Georgia.
Let me jump off of that. Let me dovetail for just a minute, because there are things that are mixing our messages up and blurring it. And that brings me to the distinctives right now, what's going on between a protest and a riot. And it feels like the valuable message of peaceful protesting to accentuate the real issues are being co-opted by an entire another group. Talk to me for a minute from a Black perspective, but how do you feel about these issues that we're seeing played out on the news?
Leland, I'll let you go on that first, because I can talk about I kind of get going, so you go.
Okay. I you know, I think it's disappointing that the message of the peaceful protesters gets lost with all the rioting and the looting. Um, I understand that people are angry and frustrated. So, when your voice has been silenced for so long, and when you've tried to peacefully protest, you had, people like Colin Kaepernick, who was his movement was extremely unpopular, but he was trying to bring awareness to this very issue that we are back at again right now. He figured out a way to do it peacefully. He talked to a person in the military to make sure that he didn't, he wasn't disrespecting the flag, which I think people were kind of conflating the issues at the time
Yeah.
as disrespect for the flag, when really he had his own he had his own protest that he was his cause that he was trying to bring attention to, and he did it, and then he got shunned and pretty much beaten up for it publicly. And then you had situations where, the Eric Gardner situation, and NBA players wearing T-shirts saying "I can't breathe," and then you've got certain news outlets saying that athletes should be athletes; they shouldn't speak on social issues. Well, they're human too; they live in this world, and those social issues impact them too. So it's like, at what point do you get to peacefully get your voice heard until you just keep getting stomped on for doing it the right way, and then eventually you do something violent, you scream, you do something that's completely out of character, not making it right. But certainly I understand that part of it, because I know if I keep getting stomped on when I'm doing the right thing and oppressed and pushed and pushed and pushed, eventually, I push back. And I think we can all understand that, from not necessarily this perspective, but there's some instance where you feel like you've gotten pushed to the brink and you just can't take it anymore. Again, not condoning the rioting, not condoning the looting, because the looting is a whole separate issue. I don't even think that's a part of what's going on.
Yeah.
But protests happen, and then eventually, when you're silenced enough, and your voice is continually being silenced, you may get to a point where you say enough is enough. Again, not excusing it.
Just as a counter follow-up question, and just from perspective to clarify, do you think there's any difference between, because one of the values of American culture, and having gone to so many communist countries and Islamic countries now, coming here, I'm like, okay, we live in a country that allows the freedom of me to be able to vocally actually say, I disagree with the president, I disagree with this, I disagree. That's the beauty of the freedom of the country that we live in. But do you make any distinctive between the beauty and the value of freedom of speech and being able to express those views in a public forum versus a private forum? And the only reason I'm asking is that many would argue against to say, well, the athletes are doing it while they're on the payroll of the company that just told them not to, as opposed to using the same forums of every other community group that says, go on the street, form a parade, do a protest, instead of actually doing it in a privatized forum where I'm using the employer's venue for my protest. Do you make any distinction between the public forum of freedom of speech versus the privatized forum?
That's a really interesting question. I'd never really considered that, but certainly, I think in any, with these athletes, where you kind of instantly become someone's hero, or someone's someone to be revered or looked up to. It's hard to, when you have, when you're playing a game, that you're getting paid millions of dollars for, and you have, numerous eyeballs on you, to play your game. at some point you realize, there are some things that might be a little bit more important than my game. Yeah, I'm on the payroll, but there's something that's happening that's greater than my game. And I have a platform to bring some attention to it.
Yeah, I
So
love that you said, I have a platform and I should use it, because I certainly know that as believers, I get excited when a Christian says, I give all the glory to Jesus, but I do know that there are restrictions. And so sometimes, those organizations, the NBA or the NFL, will actually say, you ain't wearing that shirt, you're not wearing that cap, you ain't doing that thing. And so, I think it is a little bit sticky. I'm just curious where you
it
land.
is.
Before I'm going to go to you, Evelyn, but before I do that, one thought occurred to me as I was watching some of the protest riots. I started thinking about probably a terrible analogy, and I'll get flamed for this later, but I'm just going to throw it out there. One of the reasons we've struggled as Americans fighting a war in Islamic countries is because the enemy actually hides in civilian homes. They mix themselves with the innocent. And I wondered, is that what's happening in these riots, where there's literally some people who really aren't there to protest, or really there more from an anarchist view, but they're using the convenience of a hidden crowd, mixing that and using that environment, when in fact they're not speaking on behalf of the others that are really there representing the fact that it's time for us to hear their voice. I wonder if that's a little bit of what's happening. So, Evelyn, what are your thoughts on all this?
Wow. I mean, when I look at it, I always think about, I know I'm going to come back biblically, and I can't help it because I keep doing it, but that's just where I go most of the time. So I do apologize if people say, well, why does she always go? Because that's the way I have to look at everything, because that's the only way that I can get peace about things, and the only way I can look at it. And I kind of look at when Jesus was walking among us, and well, not us ourselves, but among people, and there were followers. There were those who went against them. There were those who, you get a whole group of people.
Yeah.
So when I see rioters and looters and all of that, I kind of see a cause, which in his case was the good news of the gospel. And now is to point out and make aware of the bad things that are happening in the world. And then you have the others that are there just because, they're there for their own reasons. And some to support the cause and to have the cause go forward, and others just because they're there for their own decide. They want to see what's happening. They want to be part of the group. They want to be able to be angry and mad because they were mad about something that happened in their life and experienced it, and now there's a chance to revenge. Some people an opportunity to get some free stuff, let's be real, and some is just, you get the different groups of people for different reasons. Some revenge, some for other things. And the sad part is that the message gets lost. What you're actually trying to focus on gets lost in all of the mess. And we've got to find a way to bring back all of the stuff that we need to really focus on and get rid of all of the other. How to do that when you've got all these people with all the emotions, all these feelings, and all these different purposes and reasons that they're being a part of things? That's a good question. Maybe, higher leaders, getting together and having a larger forum like this one, talking about real issues, looking at police officers, the high people that look on those and see, we've got to change. We got to put some things in place to stop and prevent, where you can definitely see excessive force is being used. We've got to stop up as soon as there's different people who are sending and bringing attention to us that this person is a little bit more aggressive, to retrain them. And if they can't be retrained, get them out of there. There's different things that can be done on a more leveled forum that, probably the way that we're doing it and is being done right now is not going to accomplish what we hope to accomplish, unfortunately. Hasn't accomplished it in the years past, and I can't see, history kind of repeats itself, that it won't happen now either, not the way it's going. So,
What a great analogy. I love what you said, putting it in preacher terms. not everyone who was in the Jesus crowd was in the Jesus camp.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Have their own perspective.
Their own stuff. Well, Pastor,
Yes.
I don't want to keep you because I know you needed to go.
I do right now. And I thank you all for the opportunity. Pastor Brian, you know how I feel about the church is nothing else that I can say. I mean, and I don't get on Facebook and I don't get on other things like that often, but when something good's going on, I just got to throw it out there. And I mean, I'm just proud. I'm excited with Leland and everybody else that's come forth and actually talking about what's going on. And I think it's good to have an opportunity to see things from a different perspective. You know, that sometimes right when we're hearing it and staying in the media and everything is right there, we're getting our feelings all in ourselves, but being able to take the time and talk about it and looking at it from a different perspective, and then not being angry at every white person because of what somebody else has done is very important, because not everybody is the same way, you know, and just loving one another in spite of ourselves. And that's the big key. That's the big key. So I thank you. I appreciate it. And I pray that someone's life, you know, they just turn things around if they were thinking in that way, that they don't now, you know, and they stop and say, wait a minute, and let me look at it this way and see how I can do this in a different, you know, way. And, you know, we just all need to pray. You know, I do that continuously, you know, just pray for everything going on and the families that are losing loved ones, you know, and just the whole situation. It's definitely needs prayer on it, because I know one person who can take care of it. And he's on the job. He's on the job without a doubt. So God bless you all, and thank you all for this opportunity. Okay.
Thank you. Evelyn,
All right.
love you.
Yeah.
Take care. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. See you, Evelyn.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, one of the things I just want to wrap up before we close out is just if anything good has really happened out of all this horrible evil, conversations are starting to happen. Yeah. And so thank you, Leland, for joining us today. And I just want to encourage everybody out there. I know we still didn't hit every question. I know that you probably still have some more questions. I want to encourage you to start having intentional conversations. We're not going to grow if we don't ask questions, if we don't get honest, and get around some folks that we trust and we know are mature believers, like Leland and Evelyn, and just say, look, I'm white and I ain't right. You know, I need help. And truly, there's something we can all learn from one another's perspective. We need to keep the conversation going and realize that there are. I love what you said earlier, Leland. It's not paranoid when you've been hurt, and when you've been hurt and we touch that touch point. Sometimes we don't cry out in pain. Sometimes it looks like anger, and the truth is we need to gauge that and give a little bit of grace and give some love for some folks, and just recognize that there has been plenty of pain going around, and we hopefully will become a generation that learns from this. I hope we start to learn that it takes more than legislation and laws being passed. That doesn't create true civil rights. It's got to happen down to the grassroots with the hearts of the people. So Brian Lloyd, any last thoughts?
You know, I was just I'm grateful for Evelyn and Leland and for you, Pastor Brian, that we had this conversation. And I'm just reminded again, you know, there's even from the Christian community, there's this thread going on that says, hey, what we don't need to hear is that we just need Jesus. Yeah. Well, I think I'd push back a little bit on that, because I think ultimately Jesus is the one that binds every race together, you know, and brings peace and brings harmony when we love one another. And I think I'm just reminded again on why we do need that kind of gospel love, because the gospel is what pulls people together. Did it in the Bible with Jews and Gentiles, and it can do it now. And I just want to encourage, I think, all of our viewers who are following Jesus, you know, just to continue to remember that and continue to love one another. And I think that's, you know, what we have to do. And I'm glad to have these kind of conversations just to get us to think deeper So it's been good, and I know it's going to help a lot of people. It's helped me, and thank you, Leland, and for helping my eyes. We white people, black people, have shackles over our
Yes.
eyes,
Yes.
and we need help from one another. I love the verses, ironing, sharpening iron. I love Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. Like we have to help each other, see a little clearer. And you did that today, and you did that Sunday, and I know that'll continue on as a result of this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Leland?
I appreciate you guys, just continuing this conversation. I think, we are one body. I was reading in Revelations 22, chapter 22 today. I can't remember the verse, but, it just talked about how, all of the servants had, his name written on their foreheads. And, it didn't, there was no distinguishing by any, social or cultural context. His name was all that we need to belong. So we're one body. We've always been one body. That's how he designed us to be. So my hope and my prayer is that we get to that point where we're here on earth acknowledging that that's what God designed us for, to be one body, one community.
I love what you just said, because that picture is so beautiful, surrounding the throne. And I love the fact that in the end, he doesn't actually homogenize the races. It actually says from every nation, tribe, and tongue. And again, that word nation is not country, it's ethnos. It's literal people group. That God values the distinctive so much that we are going to see heaven filled with color. I love that. I love the fact that that one name brand puts us all into the same camp. How cool is that? Great picture. Pastor Brian Lloyd, would you pray for us and pray for our country as we close this out?
Yes. Father, thank you just for the blessing and privilege to be able to have this conversation today, to live in a country where we can. And although we have these kind of freedoms, Lord, they're often taken advantage of. They're often manipulated. They're often distorted and used for harm. So, Father, I want to pray for our country right now, Lord. I pray you bring peace, Father, to our nation. I pray you bring peace with our government leaders. And I pray you bring peace with Black people and white people, and that we would all come together and be, of one accord, that all lives matter, Black, white, brown, Asian, whatever it is, Lord, that we all matter. And Lord, I pray that you help us get to that place, Lord. And Lord, I just pray for everything that's happening. I pray for George Floyd's family, every single Black man that has been, and Black woman that's been affected by this, that's lost their life through racism, Lord God. It's not what you want. It's not what you would have for us, and it's evil. And Lord God, I pray that those of us who know you would continue to shine bright in the face of racism, that we would be the light that you talk about that shines brightly in our communities, in our states, and in this nation, Lord. And Father, help us in many of the other churches throughout this country be a voice for every single person that is hurt or that has been mistreated. And Lord, you know what that's like better than anyone. But I think about those words on the cross: forgive them, for they know not what they do, Lord. And help us have a heart of forgiveness, Lord, through this time. And Father, I pray for our leaders, and I pray for peace in every single state in this country right now that is being just destroyed even in some areas through looting and fires. And Lord, I pray there'd be peaceful protests, Lord, and that those voices would be heard, and that we'd be a changed nation. I pray all this, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Leland, thank you again for helping us.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
And I'll have to say thank you again to Evelyn, even though she's not here, but we love you. Thank you guys so much for this conversation today. God bless. We'll see you next time.
God bless you guys.
Yeah.